town today, so it's hitting 4:30 tomorrow.
So we have to suffer this.
Yeah. I guess the first item order of business is a roll
The
call.
roll call, right. All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Eduardo Cabler, Executive Director of the El Paso NPO. So for roll call, just as a reminder, we're going to go, well, starting with the chair and vice chair, and then in alphabetical order. For those that are participating, policy board members participating by video, please start your camera to make sure that we count you, even though you don't count for quorum, but just to make sure that if we know that you're there. All right, so starting with Chair Lina Ortega, Vice Chair Walter Miller.
Here.
Mayor Antonio Araujo. Mayor Ivy Avalos.
Here.
Senator Cesar Blanco. Senator Joseph Cervantes. Trent Doolittle.
Here.
Representative Art Fierro. Representative Mary Gonzalez. City Manager Tommy Gonzalez.
Here.
Representative Cassandra Hernandez.
Present.
Yvette Hernandez. Commissioner Ileana Holguin.
Here.
Present Eduardo Hernandez.
Okay. All right, Representative Willie Madrid.
Here.
Mayor Oscar Leeser.
Here.
Mayor Manuel Leos.
President.
All right, Representative Cici Lizarraga.
Present.
Chuck McMahon.
Present.
Representative Joe Moody. Alderman Esteban Olivas. Representative Claudia Ordaz Perez.
No. Here.
Norma Palacios.
Here.
Mayor Javier Perea.
Here.
Representative Henry Rivera.
Here.
Sam Rodriguez.
Here.
Mayor Benjamin Romero. Judge Ricardo Samaniego.
Here.
Ellen Smythe.
Here.
Tomas Trevino.
Here.
And Mayor Diana Trujillo. All right.
Present.
Okay, we have to establish a quorum.
Did you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
We have established a quorum of 16 exactly, so please, if you need to leave the room, you will be breaking our quorum. Our next item on the agenda is our public comment period. Has anyone signed up for public comment?
On Teams. All right, Mr. White, can you please unmute your microphone, and you have 3 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm Scott White with El Paso Bicycle Pedestrian Coalition, and this Sunday marks the World Day of Remembrance for victims of traffic violence. I heard a bit of the training this morning, and some of the issues that we're talking about definitely relate to safety. And on this day, this coming Sunday, we are actually going to hold a virtual vigil. It will be El Paso as part of the statewide coalition, working to highlight all the deaths that have occurred on the Texas transportation system over the past year. It was mentioned that over the past 20 years, we have not seen a day without a death on the transportation system, and that is a streak that does need to end, and we need to work to find ways to approach better solutions, to fix the system, and to minimize the danger to all users. In El Paso, for 2020, there were over 42,000 crashes. Of these were 203 severe injuries and 84 deaths. When we look at what the estimates are for the cost of this, that actually works out to $750 million in economic damages and upwards of $3.9 billion in total cost to our community. That is a huge impact in terms of damages, lost wages, harm to the families. And I want to thank the County of El Paso, who this past Monday passed a resolution recognizing this Sunday as the World Day of Remembrance. So thank you, Judge Samaniego. And I think it's important that we recognize that this is more than just the loss of life, but it is a harm to the families and to the survivors and what it does to them, and why we need to add another E to the discussion that was heard this morning, and that's equity. Because so many people are harmed in this system that are just trying to get someplace safely, but when the system is designed against them so that they cannot easily walk, bike, use transit, so they don't feel like they are obligated to drive everywhere, our system doesn't really take that into account. We also need to change our language. We need to stop talking about accidents and talk about these as crashes. It's a more neutral term. It does not imply that there is no cause, that it just happens. We know it happens either because of behavior or system design, and that is why something that you all can do.
Scott, thank you. Your 3 minutes are up. Can you please wrap up?
Yes, sir. So, is the NPO can look to adopt Vision Zero policy to develop safe systems, address speed management, and fix the issues associated with distracted and aggressive driving. I hope Marisol has my contact information. I am willing to spend time talking to all of you about how this can benefit our entire region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. White.
Was that all that was signed up for? Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to address this council? Okay, now we can go on to our action items, discussion and action. The first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the October 22nd, 2021 El Paso EPMPO TPB board meeting.
Mr. Chair.
Motion approved.
Second.
Just a comment. A reminder for everybody to please speak into the microphones because I'm getting messages that through Teams the audio is not very good. So please.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Is there discussion on this item? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 2 is approved the Sun Metro service expansion policy. Mr. Pablo, I guess you're doing this?
Well, actually, I think we're going to allow Sun Metro to do this, but let me start just by giving a little bit of a background. The document that you see that we're actually bringing to you for action is really it all started with about a year ago in late 2020 when we got a request from the South Central Regional Transit District in New Mexico, specifically requesting the use or having access to Federal Transit Administration 5307 funds that have traditionally come to Sun Metro here in our region. So this request really triggered a lot of research from our part, again, the understanding what the role of the MPO is, and working with Sun Metro, it's like all federal programs, nothing is easy or clear, right? So it took a lot of researching and all that, and I've had to do a lot of kudos to MPO staff, to Harrison Clark, who took this and really started working and figuring out what it is that we needed to do, working with FTA folks. And then as we understood the process, bring some Metro staff in, and of course Ellen Smythe and her staff worked really hard. So, well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Ellen.
Do you have the presentation?
Yep.
Okay, good morning. Ellen Smythe, City of El Paso, Sun Metro. Can you hear me? Is this on?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, next slide. So the strategic goal for Sun Metro is to enhance a regional comprehensive transportation system. This presentation was put together for City Council and the Mass Transit Board, so I'm just going to use the same presentation for the EPMPO vote today. Next slide. So, as Eduardo mentioned, we were approached last year by the South Central Regional Transit District looking for their proportional share of the 5307 funding. And because Sun Metro has been the only transit provider since we were created back in 1977, we've always received all of the funding into our budget. And so this request was a first time. It's not like previous administration didn't address it, or it was dropped in a crack, or it wasn't any of that. It's just that the South Central Regional Transit District was created, I believe, 3 years ago, maybe 4 now. And so at that time, over the last 3 years, they became an eligible recipient. Next slide. As we mentioned before, we are in an urbanized area, which includes New Mexico. And because of that, the population that goes into the formula, FTA formula, includes the population of that piece of New Mexico. So next slide. Again, this is just some background. The 5307 funding is an annual allotment to every single eligible transit provider in America based on a formula of ridership, population, etc. It's a pretty complicated formula, and as Eduardo mentioned, Harrison dug out all the information, and he and me and my staff went through the formula meticulously, trying to find an error that we wouldn't have to share the money, but the reality is it is a good formula and it's a fair formula. So, and I'm welcome to share it if anybody's really wanting to get into the nitty-gritty of that formula. Next slide. So at the end of the day, this is the allocation based on the formula. So it comes in 14.396 million, and apportionately 13.8 would stay in Texas, and $551,594 would go to New Mexico. And of course, if say another provider comes into Texas, like El Paso County, or another provider comes into New Mexico, those two numbers would have to be similarly allocated to the new people. We don't get more money. We just get to divide the pie into smaller pieces. So that's kind of the writing on the wall for the Sun Metro budget. As more eligible, unless we, consolidate to this regional transit authority that we need to work towards, Sun Metro will be continuing splitting the pot with the other eligible providers. Next slide. So again, there's direct recipient and designated recipients. And so Sun Metro is both a direct recipient and a designated recipient. So we receive funding directly from the FTA. Designated is recipients that have been designated by the state governor to receive or sub-allocate the money. And this is just, again, more of a background on how we came up with the expansion policy. Next slide. So the purpose of the policy is to give the City of El Paso the methodology to pay out this money. Because right now we have no method in place to say randomly, okay, here's your $530,000, So the purpose of the policy is to have it approved by the Mass Transit Board, approved by the NPO Board, and put it in a file so that going forward, if any other new eligible transit providers come forward, we won't have to go through this analysis. We'll already have a policy in place, and it'll say very clearly, how the funds will be split. And so that's the purpose that we're here today. And it was approved by the Mass Transit Board last week. Next slide. So in the policy, there are 4 ways that we can expand Sun Metro within this urban area. So a new entity could dedicate their sales tax, just like the City of El Paso does, so it's a dedicated funding source. to provide mass transit. So they would just be a total separate entity, yeah, with their own funding, their own taxing, whatever. Maybe, Horizon City could do that. I don't know you would want to, but you could. Another way to come into the fold would be to have a direct contract with Sun Metro. You would just say, okay, Ellen, we want you to provide the buses to run to the Far East County, and we're going to pay you whatever it costs to do that. And so they would become part of the funding that we would use to supplement that contract. A third option would be to establish the governing board as a local government corporation. And this option is what El Paso County is currently going down that choice right now. And so we were hoping to ask for an update on where that process is at our next monthly meeting, so we can get an update on where they are with that effort. The fourth option is what the South Central Regional Transit District has requested, that they become a direct recipient. So instead of the whole 15 million coming to Sun Metro, 13.5 would come, or 14 million, 13.5 would come to Sun Metro, and the $500,000 would go directly to South Central. We would not be the fiscal agent. We would not be responsible for audits. We would not be responsible for performance. And they would be a direct recipient of the funding, and they would be required, just like Sun Metro, to meet all the, 5,000 federal rules, right? So that's the one that South Central is looking at. And all these options are just defined in more detail in the actual document for your reading enjoyment. Next slide. So in the service expansion process, we're requesting that any new entities would have a resolution approved by their governing board, and then they would also submit the agreement between Sun Metro and the local government to define the method and terms. So basically, it's a plan, like how are you going to grow your service, or where are you going to provide service, just so we have something in the file on what you're going to use the money for. And then for service expansion for a direct recipient, we would provide a split letter. We would send a letter to the FTA designating how much money to be designated. In the formula, it is a population based, and so 2010 population census data is currently being used. The 2020 data we're hoping will be incorporated next year. So the funding may or may not, depending on the rest of the United States of America and where we stand in our growth pattern. We may get a little bit more money, or we may get a little less money. So we're waiting anxiously to see how the 2020 census data is going to impact next year's funding. Next slide. So then we provide documentation to FTA to show how the split would be made. It's really easy right now. There's one in New Mexico, one in Texas. Very simple. It's already in the table, New Mexico and Texas, so that won't be a difficult call. And then FTA can grant to the direct recipient after we provide the split letter. The money will just go straight over there. And then Sun Metro would provide the split letter for other eligible recipients later. This is a process or policy that should be useful in the future. Next slide. Okay, so in the policy it says that any new entity that wants to join up with this funding source would have 1 year to submit all their documentation, get the resolution, make a plan, bring it forward, have it approved, present to the MPO. But because South Central's already been working on this for a year, we'd like to ask for an exception for this one brand new case, as our inaugural candidate, that they wouldn't have to wait a whole other year, because they've already been patiently waiting for a year. So, but that we would require them to still submit the application, the resolution, the paperwork, but we would give them a year to get their paperwork in. So that's the exception that we're requesting. Next slide. So we recommend that you approve the policy. We recommend you approve this one-time exception. And then we would, Sun Metro would issue the letter to the FTA. And that's what we're asking for your vote today. I think that's the whole.
Thank you, Ellen. Are there questions?
Thank you. Ellen, just for clarification, this is just kind of like the process for the mass transit for the city of El Paso. However, there are a whole nother level of like requirements that the FTA has for a provider.
Yes. So what she's talking about, the FTA has requirements that any transit provider will have to meet. One of the most, I would say difficult, but one of the most visible requirements is that whenever you run a fixed route system, that you have to provide their complimentary ADA service, the paratransit service. And so it's 3/4 of a mile on both sides of the bus route. And that's for fixed route. Fixed route definition is, I'm gonna pick up, the bus will be here at 9 o'clock, and it'll be here at 9:15, and it'll be there at 9:30, so it's a schedule. So that's a fixed route. So if they run a fixed route where people can get to where they need to go, and they know how long it's gonna take to get there, they have to provide a complimentary paratransit service. So you've seen the Sun Metro lifts running all over town. Versus if you just get on the bus like and there's no set guaranteed time, then that's not considered a fixed route. So it's like on demand, like Uber, pick me up now, drop me off now. That's that type of on-demand system that some transit agencies offer that on-demand. That would not qualify for the ADA. But anyway, there are, to answer your question, yes.
Because it's important because it's incredibly costly for Sun Metro. And so what is a cost for one ride?
Yeah, the cost, the actual cost of service to provide a paratransit lift is $40 per ride, and we charge $2.50.
Okay.
So this grant money is used to subsidize to the tune of $9 or $10 million of the 14. Almost all of it is dedicated to that one program.
So that's one ride. So if you did a round trip, you're looking at $80.
Yes.
Okay. And that has to be provided for free.
Yes. So, and it's probably closer to 100 now with all the prices of steel and gas and labor. Everything's going up. So that $40 was based on 2 years of the 2019 data before the pandemic.
Thank you.
Representative Lisaga?
No.
There is another question.
I just want to commend the staff, and I appreciate the work that they've done over the last year with the SCRTV and to getting to this point, because I know this is, I know it's the new tool to several of us, and I do appreciate the work that's gone behind it, and it's just a matter for us to make sure that there's equity in the funding that's coming to that goes to the next year as well, and that we can provide these services that our people seriously are in need of. So thank you, I appreciate it.
Well, I know when I took office, it was a big concern to y'all, and I want to thank Ellen for addressing your concerns and coming up with a resolution that actually works for everybody. Because I know you sent us a letter, and we had a meeting, and we've talked about it. So this was, how do we best take care of not only the city, but our region. So Ellen, thank you. Your team did an incredible job to meet all the concerns. And, one of the things that she wanted to make sure that Sun Metro was not going to be responsible for administering it. Sun Metro was not going to be responsible for doing any checkups or anything. So this was really a process that made it very transparent. And again, you asked for us to work with you. We did. And Ellen, thank you. You did an incredibly great job.
Further questions? Anybody signed up for this item?
With that, I have a motion to approve.
Mayor, if I could ask if you amend your motion to include the one-time exemption for,
South Central.
you're approving the rule, but we need an exemption
Yes,
for it.
Absolutely.
We do have that exemption.
Absolutely.
For it.
Yes.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? All in favor?
Right.
Yes.
Anyone opposed? Anyone opposed? Hearing no opposition, the motion carries. We can now go to item number 3, which is to authorize the EPO Executive Director to sign the contract amendment between the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality and El Paso Metropolitan Planning Organization, contract number 582-20-11979.
Good morning, Eduardo Calvo with the El Paso MPO. So the item here, it relates to the current contract that we have with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ, for what they call Rider 7. So this is a rider that came out of the legislature. It's been around for several years now, or several rounds. And non-attainment areas throughout the state of Texas are awarded funds under this rider. So the money is designated to these areas, but then the MPOs are responsible for submitting a scope of work and how we're going to be using that funding to look at specifically and how to address issues with ozone. This is specifically for ozone, not for PM10 or CO. So in the backup information, we have the amendment to the existing contract that shows that the original contract was for $281,000, and we are currently using those funds to develop what we call the sketch tool, which is a simplified way of estimating emissions of pollutants directly from our travel demand model. It's an easier process instead of going through the full-blown conformity process and all that, but this sketch tool is very useful for us to understand and allows us to do a lot of different scenario planning, different ways of, if we do this, what happens to emissions? If we do that, what happens to emissions? And we are almost done with that sketch tool, and we're going to put it into play. So the good news is that the amendment to the contract, they are awarding us $547,000 more on top of the $281,000. And the other good thing is that they're giving us 2 years to use the money for that. So we've got some really good ideas that I want to share with you. But again, so specifically the action that we're asking you is to authorize me to sign the extension of the contract and with the additional funds. But before we go there, let me just share another piece of information that we received yesterday. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, made it official a couple days ago that El Paso County is going back into non-attainment for ozone. Okay, I don't know if you remember that several years ago, there was a change of the rule for ozone. So we went from being a non-attainment to overnight, we went into attainment. The story about this, and Mayor Perea, you're probably very familiar with this, when the Sunland Park area in the state of New Mexico was designated as non-attainment for ozone, if you recall, the MPO had to do a conformity analysis specifically as a result of that. That was in the 2018 timeframe. But there was a legal challenge to that designation, and without getting into all the gory details, but the result of that challenge went through the courts and all that. So the result is that now the Sunland Park, New Mexico non-attainment area for ozone is now extended into El Paso County. So at the end of the day, all of the MPO region is now in non-attainment for ozone. What does that mean? Well, it means that, well, for us, and I'll speak a little bit selfishly for MPO staff, it doesn't change things very much. We still have to go through the whole conformity process since we are still in non-attainment or maintenance for the other pollutants, but now we have to do additional analysis for ozone. As it relates to the development of the new plan, the RMS 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, we were already expecting this to happen, so we're prepared to do that analysis. So it's no real surprise, but it was made official a couple of days ago. So having said that, and going back to the Rider 7, given that Rider 7 is specifically to look at and address ozone concerns, I think the timing is perfect. So, so again, the way that it works is that, we signed the contract just like we did for the original $280,000 a couple of years ago. So we signed the contract, and then we have to submit a scope of work to TCEQ, and that scope of work has to be approved before we can spend any funds. So, we do have some ideas, especially now that we're officially in non-attainment for ozone, and we'll be submitting that scope of work to TCEQ in the next few weeks, because there is a timeline to develop that. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
I'd like to comment. The ozone problem is twofold here in El Paso because we are in a basin. And with the temperature inversions, you see it especially in this time of the year when it's really, really cold down on the ground and the sun comes out and it caps all that pollution down here. And so one of the biggest problems is something we have absolutely no control over. We live in a basin, and when there's a temperature cold at the bottom and hot at the top, then it traps all of the pollution. So, but the area that we can control is from the emissions, car emissions, truck emissions, idling. So that's one of the things we do have some control, although the bridges with their idling, it's a real problem. So it's just a problem. I just wanted to remind everyone.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could build on that. So one of the ideas that we have is precisely what Ellen was just mentioning now. Now that we have the sketch tool that allows us to estimate emissions under different scenarios, one of the cool ideas that we have is to specifically look at the ports of entry and the impact of idling on all vehicles crossing or waiting to cross in both directions. Because we typically think about northbound movement, but there's now a lot of queuing that we see going southbound as well due to the inspections that are happening on the U.S. side for southbound vehicles. So yeah, that fits very, very well. Another idea, and it doesn't have to be one single thing. I don't think it could be several things, but this is going more to the point of trying to understand, well, not trying to understand. We know that land use and transportation planning have a symbiotic relationship. However, we as an MPO, yeah, we do transportation planning, but we have no control over land use, right? But we know that land use is really what drives, at the end of the day, drives the travel patterns of the community here in our MPO region. So if we could use this, part of these funds, to begin the work in establishing an analytical method of tying in land use with transportation planning. And again, look at different scenarios at a regional level and see how emissions of all pollutants, obviously including ozone, how they change. So again, these are ideas, and we'll definitely report back to you all once we get the scope submitted and approved.
Mr. Chair, is there an opportunity, Eduardo, to collaborate or kind of meet before you submit the scope with the agencies, with us, the city, and whoever else wants to participate?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, these funds come to the MPO, but again, we're more than happy to cooperate and collaborate with everybody, because again, especially when we talk about land use, that's where it gets a little more complicated, because again, first of all, the MPO, we don't control land use, right? That's more up to the municipalities, or in the case of the county, they don't, not with zoning and all that, but the county obviously is a very important player, because a lot of the development that we're seeing now is happening in the county. So again, it's a very complex relationship, and what we need to do is, this big problem, we'll try to narrow it down so that we can come up with a good scope of work for some, and have a good work product that for the amount of money that we have. So yeah, absolutely, we'll work with all of you.
Yeah, I mean, the city, as you know, has several planning studies underway right now for the east side and infill development policy that we'd like to make sure that we marry up, and working with the county as well, really important.
Excellent.
And Edward, I just checked with my air quality enforcement and monitoring staff, and we have not been notified. So if you have any advance notice or whatever, unless it was just a phone call, if you can share with us what you received.
For the non-attainment? Yeah. Actually, I have the email here.
I guess we didn't get it.
Yeah. Yeah, so most definitely, we'll make a note and distribute that.
Thank you. With this new, I guess, the new status of the city, are we ineligible for any grant applications, or, I mean, is there any unintended consequence with this?
No, I don't think it really changes much, other than, it's not a good thing to be in non-attainment, right? But I think for procedural stuff, it doesn't change very much, like what we do for conformity and all that. I don't think for any, eligibility for other application, for other, federal programs or state programs and all that, I don't think it affects anything.
I think we would have to modify our state implementation plan. The SIP is the thing that the document that monitors our particulate matter, and I would assume we would have to modify it.
Absolutely. So the designation comes from EPA through TCEQ at the state level, and yet out of this decision, some changes to the SIP, to the state implementation plan for us will need to be modified.
I'm trying to understand if there's any industry.
I'm going to recommend that we add the non-attainment issue to a future agenda. I think it kind of is straying too far away from the motion before the TPB today, which is to sign the contract amendment.
Yes, that would be a great idea, because what I want to know is any, for a future agenda, if we can understand what impact there is to industry as well, if there's going to be any restrictions. Because I do recall when we're put into these statuses, there's all sorts of like snowball effects with industry as well. So if we can have a better understanding of that, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, further comment? Was there a comment from the public? No.
You need a motion?
Okay, we would entertain a motion to approve this.
So be.
Second. Have a motion and a second.
Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? With no opposition, the motion goes carried. We're now through with our discussion and action portion, and can move on to reports and discussion. Item number 4, Fund 5, the preliminary funding estimate for TxDOT fiscal year 2023 Unified Transportation Program and potential benefits to the El Paso region.
Again, I'm with the EPMPO. This is just a report to discuss the latest developments related to funding for transportation projects that may, hopefully will benefit our region. So the first one is, as you all heard, finally the federal infrastructure bill, which is called now the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, was signed into law earlier this week by President Biden. It's one of in your backup information. It's this one pager that we provided. This was prepared by TxDOT, and it basically shows the benefit to the state of Texas, not yet to each individual region. Of course, we're dying to know what the impact is or the benefit specifically to us. But so one big thing about this is that the federal highway reauthorization bill is finally part of this bill, right? So the replacement of the FAST Act is in here. So that's a good thing. And in the top right-hand table, right there, they're showing the different estimates for Highway Contract Authority, General Fund Advance Appropriations, and all that. But I think what's important is that the bottom line is that the average increase coming from federal funding to the state of Texas comes down to about $1.14 billion per year. That's the average for the 5 years of the new highway bill. In addition to that, there's a bunch of other new programs that we're still trying to understand, how to access those funds. Many of these are going to be competitive programs, at the national level, just like the RAISE program, which used to be the Tiger Grants or the Fast Lanes. Forget what they're called now. But we really need to get a good understanding of what these different programs are and see what we can do to bring more money to our region. So this is one piece. The second piece, which is that one that you see on the screen, which is this one, these are the updated forecasts coming from the State Controller's Office for the state of Texas that update the estimates of funding coming to the state highway bill directly from Proposition 1 and Proposition 7, which are two very important revenue sources for the state. The numbers that you see there, the updated forecast of $1.46 billion in fiscal year 22 and $2.43 billion in fiscal year 43, that's another good increase. I mean, it's we're very excited to see those those dollar amounts. Again, what this means specifically for El Paso, for our region, we don't know yet, but we're making some estimates and we're trying to get an understanding, what that means for us. What we do know, there was a statewide meeting this past week, and the question that we were asking was, given that there is some funding included for fiscal year 22, which is a current fiscal year, would those funds be reflected immediately, right? Those additional funds would be reflected immediately, meaning that if there's going to be perhaps a revision to the current Unified Transportation Program for TxDOT, which is, as you know, the document that guides the funding available. The answer is no. What is going to happen is that the fiscal year 22 funds are going to be combined with the fiscal year 23 funds, which really makes it very more interesting, as you've heard us say before. For part of the discussion for our region is really to look at the opportunities for fiscal year 23 UTP, right? And that is going on right now at the state level with TxDOT, and we're participating in many of those discussions. At the end of the day, all that means more funding for projects for our region, and that's what we're interested in. So that's, I think, all I have for you all. Oh yeah, in your backup information, this is something that was distributed to us through EPMPO, which is an association of Texas NPOs. It's one of many reports that I've seen around that provides a little more explanation on the details of the infrastructure. I can't remember the name. Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So if you guys want to read that, that's great. And we're digging into this a little more to get a better understanding of all of these things. So that's all I have as a report, and happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chair? I'm almost a little bit embarrassed to say this, but yesterday at commission, our secretary went over what New Mexico is getting, and they're talking about $100 million for New Mexico, which doesn't seem like much, but our normal STIP is about $240 million, so you're about a 50% increase for us, and that's not talking the competitive grants and those things that you mentioned. So we're excited, even though we have M's in front of our numbers instead of B's. It's good for us. So I just wanted you all to know that we are getting a little bit of relief.
And again, any additional money that comes to the region for projects and all that, of course, has to go through the MPO process, for programming and all that. So hopefully our MTPs and our TIP, for both Texas and New Mexico will grow.
And this funding, additional funding could be available for both existing projects and for new projects that are not yet on the list.
Yeah, what we envision is that a good chunk of this, in the case of Texas, of 1.14, somehow is going to be distributed among among the 12 funding categories in the UTP. Some of it is gonna go to maintenance, and I don't know if Tomas, if you have any additional information, but a good chunk is gonna go to maintenance, but some will go to category 2, which is what we use here in Texas for the highway expansion of big corridors. We're hoping to see more on category 7, STP, which is what we've been using more to